Hey everybody, tonight's video is called A Parable of Judgment, and tonight we kick off a summer focus through the books of the minor prophets. So it's actually going to last us from the Book of Hosea through Malachi. We'll probably be going through this part of the Bible into September, maybe even October. So as you might have seen the prior post, I'm calling it Vacation Bible School because many churches do like a week of activities with the kids and they call it Bible School. And, you know, I'm thinking of summer. We're going to call it Vacation Bible School for the adults in the Book of the Minor Prophets. And so we kick off this brand new study with the first up, Book of Hosea. And who is the author of Hosea? If you open up the book here, Hosea chapter 1 verse 1 says, the word of the Lord that came to Hosea, the son of Beri, in the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah, and in the days of Jeroboam, the son of Joash, king of Israel. So, kicking off the study, I do want to make a point in verse 1. Obviously, Hosea is mentioned as the author. So, it expresses the prophet's divine authority and message source. And Hosea actually is kind of like Joshua. It means salvation. And he mentions the 4 kings of Judah with Jeroboam as the only northern king. And he must have not found the northern king between Jeroboam II and the fall of the north in 722 BC worthy to mention. And what we're going to see as we go through the book of Hosea, throughout his book, he shows us that salvation is found in turning to the Lord and away from sin. And Hosea's father is seen in his children in the chapter that we're going through today. And we see that his wife's name in verse 3 is Gomer. And if you're like me, when you see Gomer, you might be thinking of the Andy Griffith show that had a Gomer Pyle back in the 60s. It was like a sitcom type show. But Gomer is a female, so it is not a homosexual marriage here, just to clarify. And Hosea's ministry spanned between 760 to 720 BC during the days of the divided monarchy. And I'm not going to go in depth of the kings that he has mentioned here. I've done prior studies through the books of the Kings and the Samuels that you can check out. And I can even send you specifically 2 Kings 14 if you want more focus on who King Jeroboam II was or what's in the Bible about him. But I will tell you as a cheater that he is a successful and good king. And under his leadership, Israel prospered politically and economically under his reign. But it was a time of spiritual and moral decay as a society. And as a result, 4 kings during Hosea's ministry were assassinated, including Jeroboam's own son, Zechariah. And before we dive deeper, a theme that we should pick up through the study of this book for the next 4 weeks, we're going to be in the book of Hosea, give or take, all the way through like June 28th, right around that point. So the end of June, a theme that you should see throughout our study is God's loyal love for his covenant people. And we'll see sin, judgment, and forgiven love as a theme. And so verse 2, as we start to kick into our study here, says, when the Lord began to speak by Hosea, the Lord said to Hosea, go take yourself a wife of harlotry and children of harlotry, for the land has committed great harlotry by departing from the Lord. So this points to the future unfaithfulness of their mother, and the children were possibly not fathered by Hosea. And that Hosea's marriage to Gomer was to depict God's marriage to Israel, is clearly set forth and becomes a key theme of the book. And before the prophet can speak to the nation, he first has to hear from God for himself. And the word God had for Hosea wasn't easy, having to take a prostitute for a wife. And to clarify a point that I made here, some argue that the children were not fathered by the prophet Hosea, that they were kind of like stepchildren of some sort. But I believe that they were actually his children. That was one commentator for this passage. And so verse 3 and 4, it says, So he went and took Gomer, the daughter of Diblaim, and she conceived and bore him a son. Then the Lord said to him, Call his name Jezreel, for in a little while I will avenge the bloodshed of Jezreel on the house of Jehu, and bring an end to the kingdom of the house of Israel. So Gomer has no symbolic significance, unlike the names of her children. In Hosea, we see that he showed obedience to God on the difficult command to marry a prostitute. And most godly men, they're not going to voluntarily marry someone along that lifestyle. And Jezreel means God will scatter, as seen in Zechariah 10:9, the name that's given to the child, so called as a prediction of judgment from back in 2 Kings 9, verse 7 through 10. And it was at the city of Jezreel where Jehu slaughtered the horse of Ahab. And bring an end looks forward to the exile of Israel to Assyria in 722 BC, from which she never returned. And Jezreel was a beautiful and fertile valley between the mountain ranges of Samaria and Galilee. And the valley became a place of judgment in 733 BC in 2 Kings 15, verse 29. And what we're going to find in our next chapter next week, Jezreel is a sign of blessing and fertility in verse 22. And King Jeroboam II of Israel is from the house of Jehu, a dynasty established through the bloodshed at Jezreel in 2 Kings 9, verse 14 through 37, and ending with the murder of Zechariah in 2 Kings 15, verse 8 through 10. And like I said, I can send you directly those videos from YouTube. Verse 5, it says, And it shall come to pass in that day that I will break the bow of Israel in the valley of Jezreel. And so the bow was a common substitution denoting military strength, the principal instrument of warfare in Israel. And fulfillment came in 722 BC when Assyria invaded. And Jezreel, which is also known as Esdraelon, extends 10 miles in breadth from the Jordan to the Mediterranean Sea near Carmel. And it was a great battlefield adjoining the valley of Megiddo, which will become avenue of blessing when Christ returns in triumph. In verse 6 it says, And she conceived again and bore a daughter. Then God said to him, Call her name Lo Ruhamah, for I will no longer have mercy on the house of Israel, but I will utterly take them away. So the Hebrew word, or for the name Hebrew Lo Ruhamah, means not pitied, nor to have to receive mercy. And the daughter is named to symbolize God bringing judgment on Israel, no longer extending his favor toward them. In verse 7, Yet I will have mercy on the house of Judah, will save them by their God, by the Lord their God, and will not save them to bow, nor by sword or battle, by horses or horsemen. So God chose to intervene on behalf of Hezekiah when Jerusalem was besieged at the hands of the Assyrians in 701 BC, as seen in 2 Kings 19, verse 2. And later on in 2 Kings 19:35 speaks of the angel of the Lord that killed the 185,000 soldiers in the camp of Syria in one night. And so verse 8 and 9, Now when she had weaned Lo Ruhamah, she conceived and bore a son. Then God said, Call his name Lo-Ami, for you are not my people, and I will not be your God. So Lo-Ami means not my people, and it symbolizes God's rejection of Israel. and I will not be your God gives the breaking of the covenant. And it's kind of like a divorce formula in contrast to the covenant or marriage formula. I am that we know from the I am statement of Exodus 3:14. And so the third child marks the extremity of God's judgment. The time for games was over. In verse 10, yet the number of the children of Israel shall be as the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured or numbered. So a reaffirmation of the Abrahamic covenant, not to be fulfilled in this generation, but in the future, as seen in Genesis 22, verse 17. The sand of the sea refers to the patriarchal promise of innumerable descendants. And the sons of the living God shows the kind of intimate relationship that God desires with his people. And so verse 11, actually it looks like I missed part of verse 10. I thought verse 10 was on the last page. So I'm going to reread verse 10, and then I'll read verse 11. And it says, yet the number of the children of Israel shall be as the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured or numbered. And it shall come to pass in the place where it was said to them, you are not my people, there it shall be said to them, you are sons of the living God. And then verse 11 says, then the children of Judah and the children of Israel shall be gathered together and appoint for themselves one head, and they shall come up out of the land, for great will be the day of Jezreel. So one head refers to the Messiah, and day of Jezreel is used positively in the sense of divine blessing. And one head reveals the completeness or the reconciliation between both kingdoms and the Lord under Christ, the Son of David. And Israel's restoration begins in the return from the exile. And come up out of the land may refer to the resurrection from the dead, as seen in Psalm 71, verse 20, and Isaiah 43, verse 6. And God promised a restoration so complete that Jezreel would once again be a name of greatness and not judgment. And I want to read just verse 1 of Hosea chapter 2, because I believe before they numbered the verses of the Bible, I believe this verse fit better with section of chapter 1. So it says here in Hosea 2:1, and that's going to end the video for today's chapters, says, say to your brethren, my people, and to your sisters, mercy is shown. And so in our next video, we'll see God's unfaithful people being proclaimed by the prophet from chapter 2, verse 2 through the chapter. But hostile siblings, Israel and Judah, will be fully reconciled, and the horrible indictments contained in the names of Lo-Ami and Lo-Ruhamah will be reversed. And what was a sign of judgment would become evidence of redemption. And so to wrap up tonight's study, we will kick off our summer focus in the book of the minor prophets. And I didn't mention this part, that when we see the minor prophets, it doesn't mean that these books between Hosea and Malachi are any less important than Ezekiel, Daniel, Isaiah, any of those types of books, Daniel. Minor just means that they're going to be smaller books. And minor does not mean that they are children as prophets. These are not necessarily teenagers that are prophets. Minor doesn't mean less important or less. And it just means that the books are shorter and narrowly focused. And that's why this whole summer we're going to be focusing on these minor books. And we look at the life and the times of the prophet Hosea. We give like a back brief to the prophet. And there's not much known about Hosea. I mean, we don't see him anywhere else in the scriptures. In verse 2 showed us the command that Hosea was to take and I'm not going to use so nice termage, he was to take a whore as a wife, a harlot, a prostitute, as an illustration of how God's people are to him. And personally, I don't like thinking of myself that way, but you know, we are so unfaithful to God without Christ. And verse 3-5 shows Hosea's marriage to Gomer in their first son. And I made another note here about Gomer Pyle, the sitcom of the 60s from the Andy Griffin show. But Gomer is a female. It's his wife, a woman. And so Gomer is in the Bible, folks. And verse 6 and 7 shows a daughter born to these parents, Hosea and Gomer. And we see mercy as discussed, as mercy is only shown to the guilty. Now I want to go over to the chapter in the book of Romans that many people don't want to touch, but I believe in the whole counsel of God's word. So if it makes you uncomfortable, sorry, not sorry. We're going to go into Romans chapter 9, and we're going to look at verse 15, I believe. Yep, verse 15. It says, "So he says to Moses, I will have mercy on whomever I will have mercy, and I will have compassion on whomever I will have compassion." So one thing we should realize about God is God's mercy isn't for everybody. And we should never think that God is unfair for not showing mercy. And the Apostle Paul, when you read further in Romans 9, he argues the point. In verse 19 and 20, when man says, "You will say to me then, why does he still find fault? For who has resisted his will? But indeed, O man, who are you to reply against God? Will the thing that formed him say to him who formed it, why have you made me like this?" We can't tell God how to be sovereign over us. We are the clay, he is the potter. So God is never unfair in not showing mercy. God would be totally fair to send us all to hell. And Hosea chapter 1 verse 8 and 9 shows the second son born to Hosea and Gomer. And then we see that the rest of the chapter in Hosea 2:1 shows the promise of future restoration. So there's some bad news in Hosea, but we get some positive light on it. And I do want to stay in Romans chapter 9. I want to read verse 24 through 26. It says, actually, let's do my common thing. I'm going to bump it up to Romans 9:22. It says, "What if God, wanting to show his wrath and to make his power known, endured with much long suffering the vessels of wrath and prepared for destruction, that he might make known the riches of his glory on the vessels of mercy, which he had prepared beforehand for glory, even us, whom he called not of the Jews only, but also of the Gentiles. As he says also in Hosea, I will call them my people, who were not my people, and her beloved, who was not beloved. And it shall come to pass in the place where it was said to them, you are not my people, there they shall be called the sons of the living God." So the Apostle Paul quoted Hosea, speaking of the one living, he speaks of the one living relationship provided in Christ Jesus, not just for the Jews, but also for the Gentiles. And let's go over to the gospel according to Matthew chapter 16 and verse 16. It says here, "Simon Peter answered and said, You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." Let's check out 1 Peter 2, verse 9 and 10. First Peter 2, verse 9 and 10. "But you are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, his own special people, that you may proclaim the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light, who once were not a people, but are now the people of God, who had not obtained mercy, but now have obtained mercy. So Jesus is the head of the church. In Matthew 1:23, a popular passage at Christmas time, the gospel according to Matthew 1:23. It says here, let's bump it up to verse 22. Matthew 1:22. So all this was done that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by the Lord through the prophet, saying, Behold, the virgin shall be with child, and bear a son, and they shall call his name Emmanuel, which is translated God with us. So Jesus fulfilled the promise of bringing Israel and Judah and even the Gentiles into one body. And just one more passage. Let's go to Ephesians chapter 2. Ephesians chapter 2, verse 14. 14 through 16. Ephesians 2:14. For he himself is our peace, who has made both one, and has broken down the middle wall of separation, having abolished in his flesh the enmity, that is, the law of the commandments continued in ordinances, so as to create in himself one new man from the two, thus making peace, and that he might reconcile them both to God in one body through the cross, thereby putting to death the enmity. And so we see how Christ has brought together the Jews and the Gentiles under one church. And so that's going to wrap up our study for tonight. We'll see you again tomorrow for our 11th topical Saturday of 2025. So we are going to take a break already just for the one single day out of the book of Hosea. But we will pick back up in Hosea next week. So I hope to see you back tomorrow. God bless. And I hope that you join these studies through the minor prophets as we watch the fall time roll in later this year. So God bless, and we'll see you tomorrow.